Hey everybody, welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffiths, and today's Real Talk is with a real leader I've gotten to know over the last couple of months. I have to say I've been a fan of the content that he shares. He is doing a ton in the content and experiences game, really focusing on evolving and impact of brands and people. And so clearly it resonates with me. So without further chatter from me, I'm going to introduce you all to Oleg Lougheed. Thank you so much for
Nice.
joining today.
Thank you. Well done on the name.
I told you it's like a pet peeve of mine when I to mispronounce. So thank
Hey, no
you.
worries. It happens. It has happened to me thousands of times by now, and I've gotten to the point where I would repeat it twice, three times, and however the person chooses to remember me on the third time, that's what we're going with. There's no changing of that. So I've been called pretty much every name in the book, except for the letter O.
Yeah, well, I'm honestly just grateful to be able to call you a friend now as well. And folks, I'll give you a little bit of context here. Oleg is executive director of a business called Overcoming Odds Experiences. He's also a podcast host. Overcoming Odds is one of the podcasts. The other one is Just a Squirrel Looking for a Nut. So I want to make sure we talk about that one too. As I said, he's made his life work, really working to impact people and brands and, help people move along in their evolution. And also folks for the, I always try to give people context for how I know the guest, because I do really work to bring people on who I know or am introduced to. So folks, I got to know Oleg through another person I met on LinkedIn, a guy named Chris Sykes. I think that's how you say his last name.
Yes.
Who's a podcaster, also works in the finance space. His podcast that he co-hosts is called Success Fundamentals. So Chris, shout out to you. Thank you so much for bringing us together unknowingly. And I think you do some podcast hosting with Chris, right?
I used to, yeah. Him and I used to host the second one that you mentioned.
Oh.
We put that one on hold for now, just because realized that I think all of us had our hands in far too many jars. And so we kind of had to take a step back and limit those. But yes, and I'm trying to even remember how you and I connected. I think it was I commented on your comment or vice versa.
Yeah.
And then from there, like one comment led to the next. And then next thing I know is we have a message exchange, phone call, and all these other things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you were
Something along
kind
those
enough.
lines?
I'm sorry.
Something along those lines, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you were kind enough to have me on your show, which we'll talk about that a little bit later, folks. But I want to jump right into one thing I love to do as, we're getting people, when people are on the show, is to have them share their own evolution, personal and professional, to how they got to the seat that they're in today. And so I would love for you to share with the audience, like, what's that been for you to get to the place where at this stage in your life, you're doing this amazing work that I think is so needed, but isn't necessarily the first thing that people think of when they're like, oh, what am I going to do for work?
Yeah.
So would love for you to share it with us about that.
It's a good question. So for me, when I think about this whole concept of amazing work to begin with, it has been a journey that has taken me to the extremes of both ends and everything in between. I mean, it's gotten me to a point where I barely had enough means on my own to survive and get through certain circumstances, to the point where I was able to experience some peaks of what people would perceive as success in the business and personal world. And ultimately what I found is that, and it's interesting that you and I are having this conversation right now, because I think if anything, the chapter that I'm going through now is about evolution. It's about scaling up, moving some of the efforts, operations, things like that we've done to get to the next point, the next chapter of all of this. And with each one of those steps, it requires a completely different set of processes. It reminds me of something that A friend of mine shared with me many years ago, and he said, whatever got you here may not get you there. And I think it's important to note, because what I have found is that in some of those moments where I was able to achieve certain goals, I continue to believe that, okay, these are the things that got me here. Therefore, these same exact things will get me to the next step. And that's not always the case. The network that was able to help me get to this point, in all honesty, is not going to be the same network that's going to help me get to the next step. And that's where I think that there is a reason for the people that come into your life. And I think there's a season, there's a lifetime for some of the people, and it seems that the lifetime is a very tiny portion of the people that actually stick around. And I don't know why it's like that in life, but it is. But ultimately, I think, long story longer, my entire journey started about 5 or 6 years ago. 5 or 6 years ago, I was doing a lot of reflection on my own life, in particular, the circumstances that I had faced from the time of my birth to being adopted, coming here and starting a business and everything. And I had a very simple practice that I had established for a couple months prior to that. And that was sitting down with no noise, no stimuli in the background, and literally writing down strengths, weaknesses, and areas that I wanted to grow and improve in. And that was the beginning to it all. I was sitting down. I remember actually the person I was dating at the time, I sat down at her table and I put just a white sheet of paper on the table, and I split the three columns and I started to write it down. And I remember some of the things that I had in areas to improve in were public speaking. I used to be terrified to speak in public. I mean, you can pay me $1 and even if you were to put a gun to my head, like, there's no way I'm saying a word. So there's just all these things that I found were interesting. And the more that I started to explore those things, the more curiosity that I started to develop around them. And ultimately, what I have found is that in doing a lot of this work the past 5 to 6 years, I mean, I'm a completely different person. I'm probably relatively the same when it comes to my character and my core. But as far as the skills that I've been able to develop, nowhere near to what it
Yeah.
used to be. So I think evolution doesn't end. I
Mm.
think there is truly no endpoint to it all. I think there's no endpoint to growth. I think there's no endpoint to maturity. I think there's no endpoint to curiosity. I think
Yeah.
there are always things you can grow in. I think there are always things that you can be curious about. And I think there are always ways that you can evolve into it. So I, in knowing all of that, for me, it's a helpful reminder, because whenever I feel like I have made it, I know for a fact that all I've done is I've crossed the bridge to the next chapter, and there are going to be multiple other chapters to seek after. And I think that's the biggest thing at the end of the day, that I truly don't want to, or talk about my biggest fear, and it's stagnation.
Oh yeah.
I don't like to be stagnant. I like to keep moving. I like to keep growing, keep creating. Once I hit a moment of stagnation, I know, to me, just based on my own philosophy, that's not living.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting that you say that because, I said this earlier, that you were kind enough to have me on your show. And in that show, you asked people to talk about their biggest fear. And when I shared with you that mine was not being able to get out of my own way or being in my own way. And it actually, I think, has some parallel to what you're talking about stagnation, because if I'm doing things consciously or unconsciously that get in my own way, I'm either making myself stuck on a rock, stagnated, or worse, regressing. And
Yeah.
so I think that's that as a bit of that driver of that constant growth. And I think sometimes it could be perceived as like, just being super type A, or, being super competitive. And it has nothing to do with
Yeah.
that. It's just a desire to continue to evolve and improve, and, to your point, grow. And I agree with you. I don't think there's an endpoint to it. It's only when we allow ourselves, again, like if I
Yes.
get in my own way, then I'm not going to continue on that journey.
Well, it's also the way that I look at it is that this is just one giant experience, right?
Yeah.
And I don't remember who said it, but truly believe this person said it best, and that's this is not a dress rehearsal.
Right.
You truly only get one opportunity to experience life
Yeah.
through this lens. Now, whatever people's views are afterwards, I'm perfectly fine with, but at the same time, it's like I have no way of knowing if any of that is true. And if anything, all I know for it to be true is the moment right now, how I'm able to experience it. And no offense, and I'm not putting down any squirrels, dogs, cats, or anyone else, but this is a pretty incredible form to be able to experience life through, the
Yeah.
form of a human being. I mean, think about the things that you and I are able to do that any of the other species simply are not able to. We're able to think of a future. I mean, a lot of the species don't have a concept of what's next, right? We're able to think of an idea, and then within a matter of minutes, within a matter of connections, we're able to manifest it, create it, and literally just started as some thought, oh, it would be cool to have this. 10 days later, you actually are holding that thing, or you're able to be a part of it. So that to me is fascinating. And going back to your point, as far as being, I am the obstacle within my own journey, I found myself, I found that to be true on many different occasions. I used to stop myself from taking action. I am an overthinker, overplanner. I can rationalize any single decision that I've ever made. Well, I wasn't meant to do it. The time
Yeah.
wasn't right. I didn't meet the people. When really the simple thing that I should have done was to send that email, to make
Yeah.
that phone call, to talk to that person that I bumped shoulders with on the elevator.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are so many opportunities that I've been given and continue to on a daily basis where I can create the life that I envision. But ultimately, sometimes I don't choose to because I
Yeah.
rationalize the situation.
Yeah.
Nah, the time wasn't right. I'm not ready yet. The reality of the matter is like, when are you ever ready?
Mm.
You will never get to the point where you are fully ready, and you will never get to the point where you have 100% of the information. 100% of the time, you are working with incomplete information,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
will
It's
always be
so
true.
it's so true. And I think that, one of the sort of tricks, and so sometimes people who are listening to this have a varying degree of sort of the degree to which it resonates with them. So I'm going to go a little bit further in kind of how I go about that as a practice. And so, because there's a degree, as I said earlier, about whether I'm aware or unaware. And so for me, and I'm curious if you have any certain kind of like a trick or a go-to that helps you. But for me, I literally like to, one of my first things is to ask myself, what's my role in this?
Yeah.
And so, when it's actually funny because I opened this talking about LinkedIn and how we met on LinkedIn and Chris and all that. And a few years ago, I barely posted on LinkedIn. I would barely like or
Mhm.
comment on things because I was so worried about,
Yeah.
putting my voice out there, putting my opinion out there. And I'm not one who typically is like worried what people think about me, but for some reason in that arena, I was holding myself back, and I had to, and I would look at it and be like, I want to be out there, but I can't. And I
Yeah.
was, again, instead of like thinking about, oh, it's other people who are going to air quotes judge me,
Mm.
I literally had to look at myself and go, wait a second, what is my role in this? And I was like, oh, well, let me get out of my own way and
Yeah.
start posting because I'm really not that important. And I'll be lucky if someone actually pays attention to what I say there. So again, I just share that that's a trick that I use for myself is when I, in situations, a lot of times is before I start to think about the other people, I, sort of that point the finger, I ask myself, what's my role in this? So again, I'm curious, is there anything that is like a helpful trick for you in your process?
Yeah, two things. So first is a bracelet I'm wearing, and I don't know if you can really see it. It's called It's Just Information.
Ah,
So what that is essentially everything around you is just information. Someone
yeah,
getting pissed off at you, you getting pissed off at them, X, Y, and Z. It's just information. that's presented in front of you in order for you to make a choice about a set of
Yeah.
circumstances. So how you react, what you choose to say, how you choose to talk to them is completely up to you. So I just literally wear this on my wrist, and a friend, another, this might be like a Chris's show, if anything. If you're looking for a headline, I would say, from one Chris to another.
Yeah.
And that's another friend of mine, Chris Keys. He gave me this, and I remember the first time meeting him and saw this bracelet on his arm, and I was so fascinated by it. And he explained to me the story of how once he started to look at it, his entire view of the world shifted completely. Because I mean, truly, if you really think about it, everything is neutral, right?
Mm.
I think what differentiates one event from another is the meaning that we choose to assign to it.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
if someone is mad at you, it's your interpretation that they're mad at you for X, Y, and Z reasons. There could be another event behind that. They may actually be mad at themselves, and you just happen to be an outlet. You might have said something that triggered something from their past, whether it's the past hour, past day, past year, and then they're just happening to project onto you because you were there. So that's the first reminder. The second reminder that I have for myself is the importance of challenging my own assumptions and expectations about things. So I am assuming that, I'll give you an example, right? Right now, I'm reaching out to different colleges and universities, high schools, middle schools, about speaking to their students on ways to use curiosity to overcome adversity or to
Mm.
reframe adversity. And there's a part of me before I sent out the emails that had created these assumptions. Well, do they want to hear from me? Why me? What makes me special? They probably get thousands of requests. Am I wasting time? And then there's the other part that started to challenge each one of those assumptions. You are special because you're bringing a different perspective, and so are you, right? The way that you host the show is drastically different from the way that anyone else hosts the show, because you are you and no one else is able to be that role. The other part was I started to challenge the content that I was presenting. Why am I feeling that it's not worthy? Why am I creating that assumption? What do I think that about myself? Do I feel like I haven't lived through enough of an experience to be able to share that with other people? And I think that boils down to confidence. Ultimately, how confident am I in presenting these things that I've learned through my life and sharing it with other people in order for them to create their own roadmap, their own blueprint? So I think challenging assumptions and expectations, it's been huge for me. And I got to give credit when the credit's due. Another friend of mine, Thomas, I'm going to butcher his last name, so I'll just Thomas fill in the blank. I'll share with anyone on LinkedIn who wants to know about him. But he has taught me that. He said to always challenge your own assumptions and expectations about anything and everything. Whenever I'm assuming that someone doesn't want to hear what I have to say, that what I'm sharing is not worthy, that what I'm doing is not worth it, asking myself, hey, where's that coming from? And why is it coming up? Once I was able to become aware of it, and I would say maybe if anything, that is probably the third, and for me, it's one of the most important steps, awareness.
Yeah.
I don't think you can ever solve a problem unless you know what the problem is that you're solving. So
Yeah.
bringing awareness to it sometimes is a huge step, because now that you're aware, okay, I'm not feeling worthy because this is the message I've been taught many, many years ago. I'm not feeling worthy because maybe the surrounding group currently doesn't view themselves as worthy. And so therefore I'm becoming the byproduct of their behaviors and their actions. So maybe it's time for me to move into a different circle, right? A circle that does feel like what they're doing is of value and significant. So going back to another point that you had made earlier, that in a way, in a nutshell, is you being the obstacle within your own life.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you brought both of those things up, because I think that I love how genuine you are when you share these things, first of all, and then it's actually something that another trick that I have for myself is, you call it, I say something similar where I'm like, it's just data. You know,
Yeah.
they're data points that we're figuring out what to do with. And then the other point, and I think that these two are very connected, the information, the data, and then the part about awareness. I think sometimes when people talk about being aware, some people who don't work within that a lot are like, what does that even mean? And so I'm really glad that you gave the example of like how to go about that. Again, it's a practice of awareness. And so, and I'm saying this for the audience, is something that I similarly do, and it is to ask myself, where is this feeling coming from? So if I'm feeling, insecure, whatever the feeling is, or I'm starting
Yeah.
to have a reaction to this data, instead of just allowing myself to go into this reaction, a lot of times I'll pause and ask myself, well, wait a second, where is this coming from? And I've actually had some people say like it's this whole, I said it to someone one day and he was like, I don't want to get into the whole like psychology behind this. And I'm actually like, that's actually not what I was doing. I'm not making it into this like big psychoanalysis. I'm just literally trying to understand, where is this coming from, so
Yeah.
I can then make a decision of, is that part of, is that part of my reality today? Is that
What do I
something
do
that
with
I've
it?
hung on to from the past or a different experience I've had? And then I can go, oh, well, that's kind of baggage that isn't really part of my reality now, and I can leave it behind. So again, I think there's a big connection between that information, the data, and the practice of awareness. Um, and then being able to make that decision of, is it something that we want to react to, or how do we want to react to it?
You become a lot more proactive than reactive
Yeah.
with a mindset like this. That's what I've realized. And for me, it's been interesting to observe because I've started to question, well, am I still human at that point? If I'm not reacting the same way that other people are reacting to loss, adversity, death, right? I mean, yes, I still cry and I still experience the full range of emotions that other people do, but I think the difference that I'm finding within my own journey is once I made the shift and once I started to look at all of these things just as information, and then I get to choose how I react to it, it shifted completely. I mean, I think if anything, it gave me the ultimate sense of liberation and freedom when it came to making my own decisions and living life on my own terms. So now, even in sending a lot of these emails, sometimes I get an email that literally says F you just with a slightly different set of words, right? This is from faculty, this is from staff of universities, or the most recent one that I got was I had reached out to this person and I had asked her a very simple question. I said, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z individual on your campus. Could you help me find them? And she said, don't ever email me again. I'm going to report you and blah, blah, blah. And so here I am, right? Like I'm playing this out, playing the situation in my head. I'm like, okay, I could do one of two things. So first, I can ignore the email. Second, I could respond to the email. I could respond to the email. And if I really wanted to, I could pick up the phone and call her number directly. And I say, you are in this role. You are in the role where you are teaching other people about life. Do you think what you had said to me paved the path for me to learn? Or do you think it was a threat and discouraged my desire to learn? And I think for me, part of me fantasized that and I'm like, that would be interesting, right? But then I went back to the point of what's the point? What's the point of me telling that to her? Am I really going to change her mind or perspective? Maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows? Has anyone ever done that? Maybe I'm the one that's meant to do it, right? Maybe I'm the one that's meant to bring this to her awareness. And that is where I think there's another point within all of this that you and I are discussing. And that's, I genuinely believe all of us have an impact on each other. People need people, people help people. So there's certain things, there's certain ways that I'm sure you have been doing things. And I'm sure that probably, just like it's true for my life, there has not been a single individual who has come to us and helped us see another side. So in this person's case, she might have been responding to emails like that since email was introduced to her. So what if I'm the one that's meant to play that role and show her the other side of the perspective and not point fingers at her as far as look what you did, but more so, this is the way that I interpreted that. I interpreted this as a threat instead of an opportunity to learn. And is that ultimately what you want to create for, let's say, a former student of yours, right? Because I'm sure there are other students from her program that reach out to other schools that go on to be speakers and communicators and whatever else. So
Yeah.
I think ultimately, in my opinion, I think what is missing more so in today's day and age is the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes
Yeah.
and then make the decisions based on that. Not make the decision based on your perspective, but in even sending that email. Is that an email that you would want to read? Is that an email that you would respond to?
Yeah.
Right? Which helps craft. Like, are you going to put a memoir in an email? Because whenever I get those, I just trash, trash,
Yeah.
trash, trash. So it's unfortunately, but that's just the reality.
Yeah.
So it just makes you question, okay, if this is an email that I would want to read, then therefore I feel comfortable sending it. If I'm
Oh
sending a
yeah.
book and then I'm not able to put myself in the other person's shoes,
Yeah.
then why should I expect anything differently?
Yeah, totally. Totally. And as you're talking, it two things came to mind. And one is, so I have an amazing coach that I've worked with for years named Leslie Harris. And he has something that he said to me recently about like, do more of what works for you, what serves you, and do less of what doesn't serve you.
Yes.
And I think that that's another kind of thing that I keep in, sort of like my toolbox for myself, because to your point, to sound off at somebody's response and email is like, does that really serve me to put my energy there? I can actually just make a decision to delete that. It clearly, and like, it's not my job to teach every single, to have a teaching moment for everyone,
Yes.
and like in that moment, there's actually a teaching moment for myself to say, well,
I don't have
again,
to engage
that's
with that energy. Yes.
exactly, that's information. And I
Mhm.
can choose how I want to respond to that information. And, again, I think these are everything that we're talking about, folks, I think it's very interrelated, where you're talking about we started talking about impact and evolution and
Yeah.
awareness and these little tricks that we have for ourselves, and that it's a practice. And all of the stuff we're talking about is that, because to your point, if I decide that I'm going to engage with that energy and sound off and get pissed off and then go tell a bunch of people that I got this nasty email and everything, again, I have just gotten in my way. I have
Yeah.
completely distracted myself from my path forward to this proactive path forward, to your point about you can act more proactively, to this like ping pong reaction. And my energy has now just gone off the wall. And so
Yes.
again, I like to talk about this to make sure that to those who are listening, that it's actually making sense how it all comes together, and it's all related.
Well, I think it also speaks to the point. This morning, I watched an interesting video, and this guy was talking about how some of the things that appear to be quote unquote simple in our lives have actually taken hundreds, if not thousands of others, thousands of hours to develop by someone else. And I think everything that we're describing right now, like, yes, we're doing it in a sentence, we're doing it in a matter of 32 minutes. We're breaking down years and years worth of trial and tribulation and knowledge and processing and all these things. And I think long story longer, what I'm trying to get to is that none of this happens overnight,
No.
right? Becoming aware of your circumstances takes time to develop. Developing that into a practice where you can be less reactive and more proactive. That's years of work.
Yeah.
That is years of continuing to start with the journal. I start with that
Mhm.
every single morning. The first thing that I do, meditate and then write. Period. Like, there are no exceptions. And I think that's the way it has to be. Talent can only take you so far.
Mm.
Discipline takes you the other half or
Yeah.
three quarters. So developing these habits and these practices in a daily basis, what are you going to do to develop higher awareness? What are you going to do to react differently to people around you, their energies, and the way that they're treating you? What are you going
Yeah.
to do differently about the friend group that you are with, right? So
Yeah.
all of these are incremental steps. And I think for anyone that's going to be listening to this, just remember that none of this is going to happen overnight, but I do believe that it's possible. Jim Rowe, I watched one of his webinars or lectures 2 or 3 days ago, had said, he had posed a question to the class that he was giving the lecture to. He said, when is a good time to introduce changes into your life? And his answer was that once you get better information,
Hmm.
period. So once you feel like you have gained better information, whether it's from this show or books or whatever it is, that is the perfect time to start making changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I'll add to that I think another element of it is when you no longer want to feel a certain way.
That too.
So what I mean by that is if there's an element of this, there has to be a conscious decision of wanting to be on a path like this. Like for me, because of a lot of the traumatic experiences that I went through in my past growing up and stuff, it was like I just had this conscious decision that I didn't want to feel like a victim. I didn't want to
Yes.
feel that it was like, well, I feel this way because this happened in my family and everything. And it was like, well, I have to take responsibility for how I'm leading myself forward. How am I
Mhm.
going to be on my path and continue to evolve in those things? So for me, it was like that conscious decision of like, again, like I want to do these things. And sometimes just that can be part of what we allow ourselves to start the journey. Because it's like it just wanting an opposite feeling, because I actually make this face when I talk about like that feeling of victim work, because for me, I have another saying that I talk about, which is I want to move from a place of strength.
Mm.
And so because then I can, literally, I'm such a physical person. Like I want to stand in my strength. I want to like be strong in my core. And again, like then I feel like I can really maximize the positive impact I can have on this planet. To your point, I've only got one shot. So anyway, I just wanted to add that to it.
Well, it sounds like it's very similar to what I go through, and that's having the moment where enough is enough.
Yeah.
Simple as that, right? You go through so many things, and after a while, I think you just realize that okay, this is enough.
Yeah. Sort of get
And
sick of an experience or a feeling.
mhm, something that a friend of mine reminded me yesterday. He said, "Enough is a decision, not an amount."
Oh, wow. I love that.
And that I
Enough is a
think is
decision and not an amount.
very profound, is because it just continues to remind me that talking about that shift, talking about when you've had everything that you feel like you've had to have along that journey, it's a decision to flip the script. It's a decision to write a different story. It's a decision to change your circumstances. It's not the amount that you've accumulated to that point. And that I think is important. And for me, it's empowering. It
Mm-hmm.
empowers me to know that, okay, I am at this. Now I get to decide. How
Yeah.
cool is that? You get to
Yeah.
make a decision that can move you into a completely different path, on a completely different journey. And then who knows what's going to happen there?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows
Mm-hmm.
what type of transformation you're going to experience through that process?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I want to make sure that we talk a little bit more about the efforts that you're making, again, Overcoming Odds experiences, Overcoming
Mhm.
Odds, the podcast, folks. Also follow Oleg on LinkedIn. These are all things that you can do to tap in if this is resonating with you and you want more of what he's putting out there. But I want to kind of like laser in on the Overcoming Odds experience that you're creating in
Yep.
Austin in October. So tell us a little bit about that. And when you do, make sure that you share with people, if someone does want to attend, what can they expect coming out of it?
Mm. So for me, what I wanted to do is I wanted to create an experience where people were able to identify their fears and ways to transform those into strengths or fuel that they can use. So the event that we're putting on is called Survive to Thrive, Face Your Fears. I'm a huge believer that every single person on a daily basis encounters their own fears. I have not met a single one who says, I'm not afraid of anything. Well, let me rephrase that. I've met a handful like that, but I just think it's a bunch of BS. Like, everyone has their fears, everyone has their limitations, the skeletons in the closet. And so that's what ultimately what I wanted to do, is to create this experience for other people where they're able to tap into the fears that they have within their own lives. Some of the most common fears that I have come across from speaking with thousands of people by now is fear of living without a purpose. How do you develop that? Do you need a purpose to even live this life, to have a fulfilling life in this part of the world? Fear of not knowing who you are, fear of authenticity, something that you mentioned, right? Not wanting to post on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
stopping yourself, judging yourself before you were able to be judged by others.
Yeah.
Well, is this worth it? Should this be better? Is this missing a comma? Is this, all of these things that all of us content creators go through. And all of those things are interconnected. And I
Mm,
think how they are interconnected is that, in my opinion, they go back to the ultimate or one of the human needs, and that's the desire to be seen, heard, and valued. And
mm,
I think all three of those start with who you are. I don't
mm,
think they start internally. I think the external perspectives amplify the human need, but I think all of those things have to start internally. So something that I've been exploring in the past 3 to 4 months is this concept of invisibility. And in particular, how can curiosity help overcome invisibility? So, invisible aspects of ourselves. A lot of the invisible aspects actually were fears. And what I've realized was that one of the reasons why I chose to keep them invisible is because of shame.
oh, yeah.
Shame, disappointment, right? Not knowing what others are going to think of me, not knowing whether or not I'll be accepted. Because let's face it, the path that you and I are on, as I'm sure many of the people who are going to be listening to this, it's a slightly different path.
Mm,
Not everyone gets to be a coach. Not everyone gets to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone gets to be a business owner. Not everyone gets to be a speaker. Not everyone gets to be a variety of these things outside of the traditional jobs that are available.
yeah.
And therefore, what I think sometimes it creates is a lack of community, a lack of understanding, a lack of a desire to value the work that you do, to perceive it as work of significance and work that is making a difference. So that's what we're trying to do through this event, is to really just create an overarching perspective of variety of topics that people can tap into. And what would they walk away with when it comes to this? I would say the biggest thing is a sense of empowerment,
Mm,
a sense of understanding that they have many of these things, a sense of awareness when it comes to their own journey. So whether it is living without a sense of purpose, well, what does purpose look like for you?
mm,
Maybe you are having a purpose in your day-to-day actions. And maybe the only reason why you don't feel like you are is because it is not grand, which is one of the things that I've learned that you, particularly in US, purpose is viewed. It has to be big,
yeah.
when really sometimes it is the small things.
Mm,
Why is it not enough to hold the door for someone and be fulfilled from that? Why
yeah.
is it not enough to help buy someone groceries? Why is it not enough to go volunteer and help someone in need? Why are those things not enough? And so I think ultimately what this experience and what all the work that I'm doing is about is exploring all of these things and defining them on your own terms and then refining them over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And folks, if you want to know more about the event or the experience, you can find it on his website, overcomingodds.com.
Dot
Um,
today.
I'm sorry.
Dot today.
Oh, sorry, dot today, overcomingodds dot today. And I was actually, when I was looking it up myself, and the speakers and the people who are involved are pretty incredible. So first of all, congratulations on creating something like that.
Yeah.
And I wish you heaps of goodness at the event and with all the people that will be attending. And so I like to end our time together with guests, because we talk about so many things. We hit on a lot of topics, and some of them are a bit more out there for listeners than others. So I would love to just wrap it up by asking you, are there one or two takeaways that you really want to make sure that the audience who's been listening today, that they do take away, and perhaps into their own journeys?
I would say the first one is going back to the data and information is a reminder to anyone who's listening, and it's just information. Everything that is surrounding you, everything that you encounter, it's just information. You still have a choice in how you react and respond to any of those things. The second thing is, I think when it comes to awareness, and in particular, the things that the people may not be aware of. And that's a question of, what am I not aware of that might be harder to identify? What I have oftentimes found is an exercise that has helped me tremendously is reflecting. So journaling, I journal every day about sometimes the most random things in the face of the earth. Sometimes they have some sort of meaning and sense, but really just understanding, like starting with the basics. What am I surrounded with? What do I see? And then comparing that to maybe the day before, and then seeing the difference. What did I not see the day before? Why am I more aware of it today?
Hmm.
That water bottle has been in front of me for the past 7 days, and it's only on day 7 that I've been able to become aware of it. What was the difference the other 6 days? Where
Wow.
was my mind? What was it occupied with? I think that's one of the biggest skills, and probably one of the biggest challenges in today's day and age, is because everything is so fast paced.
Yeah.
Very easy to get off track. It's very easy to become less aware of the things, but bringing more presence. And so awareness, I think, ultimately is presence. It's being in
Hmm.
the moment, recognizing the things that are in the present moment right now. And then ultimately, what I have found is that the more I did it, the more it became a habit, the more it became a mindset. And then it just became something that I was doing, just like
Yeah.
brushing my teeth. Like, I don't really think about it anymore. I
Yeah.
don't think about the benefits or anything like that. I just do it because I know it's good for me, good for my oral health. So I think when it comes to the awareness, I think it's the same exact thing. The more you
Yeah.
do it, the better you become.
Yep. And as I said from my coach, do more of what serves you and less of what doesn't.
Yes.
So I just cannot thank you enough for coming on, for sharing so transparently, for the incredible, authentic leadership that you display. And I just really appreciate you. So folks, hope that you've enjoyed the show. Please do yourselves a favor and check out all that Oleg is putting out there, and have an amazing day.